friend Carla invited me over for dinner in the fall of 2010. It had been about 3 years since my mom died, and the guests were all in their early 20s and had all lost a parent young. We talked until 2 a.m., laughing, crying, giving voice to things we'd never said out loud. We kept getting together. A similar group began a year later. At that table was a woman named Carol. She was in her early 60s, a few years older than my mom would have been. She'd lost 3 kids in a fire decades before, and she commanded a gravitas I'd rarely seen before. For those of us in those early throes of grief, her story was the proof we needed that grief wouldn't go away, but it would get better. For her, we were a generation hell-bent on opening up about experiences she had had to keep under lock and key. And for all of us, it was a relationship that was all too rare, a genuine friendship across generations. But it was tricky too. Because she had more experience to draw upon, she was prone to advice giving. The problem was, we didn't need advice. We were looking for affirmation without judgment, to know we weren't alone. It was a pattern she didn't know how to break. She eventually stopped coming, and we figured this community was better suited to young adults. In the decades since, the dinner party has connected more than 13,000 20, 30, and early 40-somethings to one another, including more than 2,500 since the pandemic began. We found that some of the deepest communities come of connecting with people who feel like home, with whom you don't have to explain yourself. And still, for 10 years, I haven't stopped thinking about Carol and what we lost when we abandoned intergenerational connection. For too long, we have allowed grief and loss, one of the few things that all of us share, to be a conversation killer rather than a conversation starter. In a year in which grief left no one unscathed, 2020 has presented us with a unique opportunity to combat loneliness and generational segregation by forging connection out of loss. That's why in April, we began enlisting 1,000 people of all ages to join us in what we're calling the Care Squad. We start by matching each person to a grief buddy, someone of a different age. We send them each a pre-stamped postcard to send to their buddy by way of introduction, and invite each on a conversational series anchored in the theme of survival, sharing how loss has shaped them and powered them too. We found that when people arrive expecting sameness and find difference, they tend to get judgmental, apt to engage in grief wars, or to write each other off. When they arrive expecting difference, they get curious, marveling at the differences in roads walked, and simultaneously able to see sources of connection in the places they'd least expect it. If this year has taught us nothing else, it is that grief should not be shared alone, and you cannot solve a problem of loneliness and disconnection with more self-care. Carol was my first postcard. Who will be yours?